And welcome to the Business Intercept, everybody. Thanks for watching this video today. Bringing you an interesting story, one that's been bubbling up for the last week, but of course is actually just the latest in a much larger situation that's been going over the last 2 to 3 years, certainly since the advent of Donald Trump being the president of the United States. Now, again, the Business Intercept is dedicated to bringing you business news and talking a little bit about how it could affect Main Street, your pocket, your neighbor's pocket, and just, everyday Americans on a regular basis. We don't really do political stories per se here. This is not Fox News, Sean Hannity, or any of the other multitude of YouTube channels that talk about politics and things that are happening in society on a regular basis. However, as something that a professor in my college years once said, everything is political. And of course, he was alluding to the fact that politics, the culture wars, societal changes, whatever you want to talk about, call it, it does have and can have an effect on the economy, on individual businesses, and ultimately on your pocketbook. And what we're going to talk about today can affect you in many different ways, particularly if you own stock in some of the companies that we're going to be talking about, or if you advertise on some of the companies that we're going to be talking about, or if you use these platforms either for trying to build a brand, trying to be an influencer, anything like that. What we're going to talk about today has implications for you or people that you know in ways that you may not have imagined as of yet. So, to kind of set the stage a little bit, let's talk about YouTube. Back in 2019, Carlos Mazza, a left-wing activist type reporter, started complaining about what he saw as attacks by a conservative YouTuber, Steve Crowder. Now, YouTube, up until this point, had been periodically getting in the news as they would suspend or demonetize different content creators. Most of the time, these content creators were conservative leaning. And of course, the complaint was always that they would suspend or demonetize a video or a channel for breaking its content guidelines, and then everybody would point to several other left-wing or Democratic type content creators who ostensibly had done the same thing, but because they were Democratic or left-leaning, didn't have their content demonetized. So what happened with Carlos and Steve wasn't out of the blue. There was a platform, not a platform, but something was kind of building over the months regarding this. But just like that scene in Fast and Furious when, Dom hits the button in the car and that nitro goes into the engine, this spat between these two people kind of ignited what many called a YouTube Adpocalypse. And basically what it did is it forced YouTube to accelerate some changes in their content guidelines that they had been in the works for, and they started deplatforming people left and right. Again, many of the people that got deplatformed were conservative. But to be fair, there were a whole lot of other channels that were deplatformed that really didn't have anything to do with politics at all. They have these channels, and I'm sure you've run across them on YouTube if you go on there looking for music to listen to in the background while you're studying, reading, cooking, what have you. These things where there might be weather or nature scenes or anything like that, and it's got music, and it's good background music to relax or do work for. Many of those channels got deplatformed and demonetized as well, leaving the creators wondering what's going on. Well, that was more about YouTube taking away revenue that content creators had built up were living off of and needed in order to maintain what it was that they were doing, and now they were gone. And there are a whole lot of reasons why that was happening. But again, Carlos and Steve kind of was the accelerant. That argument was the accelerant for what happened over the 2 to 3 weeks that followed the initial reporting of the back and forth between these two creators. Now, fast forward to today, or this last week, and we have this story about Facebook. In the last week and a half to 2 weeks, there have been a number of groups that have been pushing Facebook to have more stringent guidelines on content and advertisers. And they've been pushing companies to boycott Facebook if in fact they don't make changes. So we've got the story first here on CNBC. Ford, Adidas, and Denny's join the growing list of companies pausing Facebook ad spending. So let's take a look about this. Major advertisers are continuing to join the hashtag Stop Hate for Profit campaign, promising to stop spending money on Facebook ads in July to pressure the company to do more to stop the spread of hate speech and misinformation. These advertisers include some big name brands. They aren't necessarily, of course, the biggest spenders on Facebook in the US. For instance, none of these brands were in the top 100 spenders on Facebook in the US so far this year, according to a marketing firm company called Pathmatics. However, some of these companies are well known. Adidas, Best Buy, Clorox, Denny's, of course, a company called Edgewell Personal Care, which is the company I've never heard of. But if you're a mom, then you know what Wet Ones is. That's one of the products that this company sells, and it's very, very popular. Ford, HP, Puma, and they've joined other companies like Coca-Cola, Honda, Starbucks, Verizon, and Unilever, among others, and saying that they're not going to spend any more money with Facebook for the month of July. Now, on Unilever and Starbucks, their pullback is more general. It's not just Facebook. They're talking about there's so much polarization, both on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and other social media platforms, that they don't want to get in the middle of all this. So they say. We'll get to that in a second. The companies, or rather the organizations that are calling for this boycott are the Anti-Defamation League, the NAACP, Sleeping Giants, Color of Change, the Free Press, and Common Sense. And they're saying, or accusing Facebook of allowing racist, violent, and verifiably false content to run rampant on its platform. Now, this is an interesting claim because, look, all of these groups are left-leaning groups, okay? And so the issue here for Facebook and for a lot of the other social media platforms is, what do you consider racist? What do you consider defamatory? What do you consider misinformation? So, for example, not on Facebook, but on Amazon, a couple weeks ago, ex-New York Times writer and reporter has been railing and writing against a lot of the COVID-19 stories. Basically, he's of the opinion that the government is inflating the danger, and he's using basic CDC science in order to do this. However, these other organizations would consider that misinformation. And Amazon, in fact, wasn't going to publish his book on this subject because of that. Now, they came back after there was some pushback on Twitter and in the media about them essentially not allowing that book to go through, saying that it was a mistake. But most people who have been watching these companies are a little bit suspicious about whether or not it was a mistake or not. So, what does that really mean? Well, look, Let me just break this down in a real. Let me just lean back a little bit because this is kind of funny. What we have here is these organizations, because they are more left-leaning, shall we say, they're more inclined to believe that anything that the left says is not hateful and 100% truthful, and that anything that people on the right side says is hateful, racist, or misinformation. So, for example, in the very first video for this channel, I talked about how wokeness is becoming the new McCarthyism, and it was really a way to talk about how people who are, for instance, being critical of the movement Black Lives Matter, not the sentiment. Lots of people think the lives of African Americans matter. Lots of people want to see reform in police departments. Almost 99% of the population was against what that cop did to George Floyd. So we're not really talking about that. We're talking about the organization that goes to protest and says, fry them up like bacon when talking about cops. We're talking about organizations whose leaders say things like, we're going to arm ourselves in order to push back against police, who call for economic Marxism, and who say, all white people are racist. The point is, there are many reasons to be critical of the Black Lives Movement organization. And people who have done that have been getting fired. So you could ostensibly say something, post something, advertise a book being critical of Black Lives Matter, and any of the groups that are trying to organize this protest would consider that actual racist content. This isn't hyperbole on my part, rather. We've seen this on Twitter. We've seen this in the news. So why does this culture war situation really matter? Well, it matters because here's what's happening. Facebook is in a very weird spot here. Zuckerberg is a lefty. He's out in California. He's young. He's surrounded by people of like mind. So he's inclined to believe whatever a Democratic or left-wing point of view of the world happens to be. On the other hand, he is a business owner of a massive company with many employees, a massive infrastructure that must be fed and maintained, which means as a business owner, he has to make profits in order for Facebook to continue, in order for his own personal wealth to continue, in order for Facebook to continue doing the things that he believes that the company should be doing either now and in the future. He needs revenue. Profitability must be maintained. And therefore, anything that threatens that is a problem. So let's take a look at, for instance, their stock chart. Now, as of right now, the stock has gone up about 2% today at the close of today's market, which has led many writers to say they're kind of shaking off these boycotts. I would say if you look at this downward trend right here, that pop up was probably profit taking from the shorts, and that this still can have some effect on them. And the biggest thing is it's a PR situation in many ways. So let me use Fox News as an example, and then I'll get back to why this is important not only for Facebook, but for you if you happen to be invested in this particular company or other social media companies. So with Fox News, for example, we'll go back to Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly leaving or being fired was a surprise to some people. To people who believed Bill's story but weren't surprised, it's because a snowball effect had been building for a long time, both because of segments that he did that left-wing activist groups were able to demonize him about and start getting advertisers to pull away. And then, of course, as more and more of what was going on behind the scenes and those accusers came out, that snowball effect got bigger, 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 and bigger until they finally were able to, he was finally fired. Tucker Carlson came in, took the slot, and has pretty much led that time frame ever since. And once again, Tucker, who's not nearly as conservative or traditional minded as Bill O'Reilly or Hannity, for that matter, has still had some segments where he hits activist groups and certain left-wing viewpoints pretty hard. And as a result, boycotts have been led against him. Okay? And some of them have worked, some of them have not. But again, it's a snowball effect that even if a lot of people don't believe what is being touted by the New York Times or on Twitter about Tucker, because these platforms, particularly Twitter, is kind of like an echo chamber that makes everything sound louder, it gives the impression that more people are upset about something than actually are. So, over to Facebook. The number of people who actually find a lot of the content or ads on Facebook super racist is small, but they're a noisy amount of people that gives the impression that there's more people are concerned about this than in actual numbers. And then when you have big name companies like Coca-Cola, like Verizon saying they're not going to advertise, it matters. It matters because even if they're not spending a lot of money with Facebook right now, it can stop other companies from doing so. And at the end of the day, every company needs every bit of revenue that they can get. Even the ones that only advertise a little bit adds to keeping the lights on, keeping the salaries going, keeping all of the servers that Facebook needs and that is necessary for the company and the platform to even operate the way that we know it as. He can't take a chance of losing that revenue. So it matters to him. And we have seen this. In the last 2 weeks, President Trump has gotten hit by Facebook, Amazon, and YouTube in terms of things that they've either suspended him or put certain warnings about. In fact, let's take a look at a story here on Fox News. Now, Twitch, if you're not familiar with, is a streaming platform that a lot of YouTube people who play games use. So basically, rather than going on YouTube, they go to Twitch. They stream while they're playing these games or other things live. They've got a good amount of users. Well, Twitch has temporarily banned Trump for hateful conduct. So what did he do? Well, the Trump campaign has only been on Twitch for about a year, okay? And they recently put up video of Donald Trump's infamous escalator speech when he announced that he was running for president, and his comments about illegals coming over from Mexico and how they're bringing in crime, disease, and other things. Twitch deemed that as hateful, got rid of the advertisement, of the video rather, and has suspended their account, okay? So, they took action against the President of the United States. Now, whether you like him or don't like him is neither here nor there, okay? But what we can all agree on is that he is capricious at times. He will take revenge on people he doesn't like. I mean, he will. So, by taking that action, and by all these other companies taking that action, they are forming themselves up against the guy that everybody knows they don't like. And the calls for regulatory reform, new regulations, or even breakup of many of these social media companies can become stronger and stronger as we move closer to the election. Okay? And this is where you got to keep in mind. the problem in the last couple of years that they've had with these social media platforms has always been that the rules are not handed down evenly. They will get rid of a conservative for saying something, and then if a Democrat or liberal says something in the opposite way, that's deemed truthful, that's deemed fighting for, equal justice or whatever the case may be. Whatever you want to look at it, they're not deplatformed, they're not demonetized very often. Okay? So, what that does is puts Facebook on a collision course with Republicans and people who are concerned about not only Facebook but other tech companies' undue influence in the marketplace of ideas. As that happens, what you can actually see is regulations come down. Now, I don't know when it could happen, but look, on the left-hand side, you've got people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren who don't like Amazon for certain, and don't like Facebook and Twitter for other reasons, mainly to do with the amount of money that the owners make, conditions for workers ostensibly on when it comes to Amazon, and all sorts of things. Then on the right side, even though Republicans are inclined philosophically to allow companies to do what they want, to say they are a private company and they get to decide what kind of content is on their platform, they are more and more, however, becoming more and more concerned about how the power that these companies have in terms of communications and reach in the marketplace, how they're acting toward people who are either Republicans, conservative, or just simply want to rail against a story or anything that comes from the left-hand side. So this turns from a political story into an economic one because social media companies enjoy a very cozy bubble situation. They're considered, on one hand, the 21st century equivalent of the water cooler. So, of course, in corporate speak, the water cooler is where everybody goes to talk about sports, what happened on television, news. Everybody congregates there to get some water or a coffee or whatever the case may be, and then before they go back to the desk and start working. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of these social media platforms are that same concept with technology, which is why they have the depth and all-encompassing reach that they have. But essentially, the behavior is the same thing. And at the water cooler, at the public forum, you can't really, police what people say or what people think. But very often with these content guidelines, that's exactly what Facebook is doing. Now, on the opposite end, these companies are shielded from being sued by people for content that's on their platform, particularly Facebook. Look, Facebook is starting to do its own content, which we'll talk about in a little bit, makes them a little bit more susceptible to what's going on. But most of the content that Facebook has on it is generated by us, the people. We go in there with our pictures, our videos, our arguments, our debates. We, post stories there, like we're, putting something on the bulletin board someplace. This is where they get their content. This is how they get their eyeballs, so to speak. Okay. But if I put something on there that's violent, that's hateful, that's defamatory against a person or a corporation, Facebook can't be sued for that. Those individuals can come after me if they so choose. But Facebook is exempt from that, as is every other social media platform. But in order for them to have that shielding, they can't be editorializing, meaning whatever gets put on there, they have to allow on there. But if they start editorializing, start deciding who can say what and who can't, they're being an editor. If they start going in and deleting comments, they're an editor. It's interesting. Reddit is one of the more popular sites that people go to, has a lot of users. And of course, there was a story last year about how the owner went into individual comments and changed things, changed wording, deleted certain things. I mean, like, it would be the same as if somebody came to your house, opened up your mail, rewrote the letter that your wife sent you, resealed the envelope, and put it back into your mailbox. Now, of course, if someone actually did that in real life and was caught, that's actually against the law. You can't do that. But there's nothing against the law, quote unquote, right now, in terms of criminal procedures, certainly. But within the regulations for these companies in dealing with the internet, they're not supposed to be able to do that. If they do, they're not the water cooler. They're not the public forum. They're a publisher, same as the Wall Street Journal or the Fox News, CNN. And once you start becoming a publisher, then you can be sued. Then you are liable for any of the content that's on your platform. Certainly, Facebook does not want to do that. They also don't want to be seen as a publisher, because as a publisher, that means any content that you put in your publication, money has to be exchanged to somebody. Like when you go to Fortune magazine, okay, those advertisements, they're not in there for free. Okay, the people have to pay them. When they do a story on somebody, they're paying that photographer something for taking the picture of the people that they're doing the story on. They're paying the reporters something for writing that content. Well, Facebook doesn't pay us. You can build a platform where you have 1 million plus, users and views on these different pages and everything else. And lots of people have done that. It's a great advertising model for many companies, large and small. But whatever content you put on there, Facebook does not send you a check for, because they're not a publisher. If they start being seen as a publisher by the government, then guess what? They owe you a check. And the minute they owe you a check, their market cap, their stock price takes a dive. So let me show you a little chart here regarding a company that you may have heard of, AT&T. Okay? So, of course, AT&T today, back in the day, was Ma Bell. Monopoly that got broken up. One of the biggest, business breakups in the history of the country. This chart, as you see, is right about when they started getting the breakup, which was like 1982, somewhere around there. They broke up, they went into baby bells, they opened up the market for newer companies to come in and start, and the government did this forcibly. And then the stock price kind of went down for all these companies, which makes sense because they're kind of starting from zero as new companies, and then slowly but surely over the years have built back up. And when you look up the companies of the baby bells and how well they've done individually, they've actually done very, very well. The aftermath of the breakup over time has been phenomenal, not only for the companies that were created, but the marketplace as well, because new innovation came in. It's doubtful, honestly, that we would have the wireless market that we have today, if not for how Ma Bell was broken up. And that will matter with regard to the social media companies that I'll get into, assuming I don't forget to come back to it in just a moment. But the point I'm bringing up here is when governmental action was taken, the stock price tanked. And when the stock price tanks, what that means is owners like Zuckerberg aren't going to be billionaires anymore. Or they're going to at least lose a lot of money. He'll probably still be a billionaire, but he's going to lose a lot of net worth. More importantly, the company would, and that's going to hurt any mutual fund that has Facebook in it. It's going to hurt anybody who happens to invest in Facebook, because part of why they're able to do what they do is not just because of the revenue that they generate, and not just because of the platform they have in terms of worldwide eyeballs. It's because their expenses, I should say, are curtailed to a certain degree by not having to follow the same rules that the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times have to. They have in other words, the New York Times is a private company as well. And so they get to determine as a publisher what's in their ads, what's in their editorial pages, and even what their reporters put in the newspaper. They have sole discretion. I, as a freelance writer, as an individual, do not have the right to go into the New York Times and say, hey, I just wrote this article, publish it on the front page. Don't have that right. I can do that through Facebook, but, and this is where it starts getting a little bit tricky. If Facebook starts acting as an editor, if Twitter starts acting as an editor, as YouTube starts acting as an editor of their content, meaning they're going to decide arbitrarily what can be on their platform and what can't be, the way an editor decides what not to, then they lose how they're looked at right now by Congress and the Senate. And as soon as that happens, their business model takes a ding, a big one. Look, think about it like this. They are a private company. But in private companies, there are still certain rules that every private company has to follow. So if I go down to the local dealership and I'm looking at a Honda, they can't look at me and say, oh, that's a black guy, we're going to charge him $30,000 for a $24,000 car. They can't look at a rich white guy and say, you know what, he can afford it, we're going to charge them $55,000 for this $24,000 car. They can't do that. If they have credit criteria for getting a loan, well, assuming that the dealership is doing the loan themselves, but even just a bank, a finance company, whatever their parameters are, if I fit the parameters, they must give me the loan. If I don't, they don't have to. But they can't say you fit the parameters, but we're not going to give it to you because you're only 5 feet tall, but we're going to give it to this other person who's 6 feet tall. And now I'm being silly to make a point here. There are certain rules that all businesses have to follow legally. And if they break those rules, then they're in trouble. So the idea that private companies can do whatever they want has always been false. And it's certainly been false over, as we've had more and more regulations on things like what they can say, who they can hire, all sorts of things. Okay. So the idea that if Congress, either from the left side or from the right side, was to come in and start regulating how Facebook, Twitter, YouTube does their content creation guidelines, the idea that someone could come in and do that from the government is already well established. They can do that. So so the question becomes, are they going to? Are they inclined to get into what's going on or not? And the answer is yes, but we don't know when it's going to happen. Okay? Zuckerberg has already been on. In fact, I'll tell you what. I'm going to try and find this video right now and put this video in here. If I can find it. Zuckerberg makes mistake at hearing. See if I can find this. Because Zuckerberg he went to Congress last in 2019, I believe it was 2018 or 2019. And one of the things that he said at that hearing was that Facebook is a publisher. And that was a bit of a mistake. So let me see if I can find the video, because it's interesting to hear how he reacts as soon as he says that and realizes the mistake that he makes. Says Facebook is a publisher. Okay, let's see. Good video. All right, so okay, here it is. Okay, so I'm going to play this for you, and I want you to kind of take a look at this. This is from PBS. I'm probably going to get dinged for this, but there's really not much I can say about that. And this is going to be real interesting. Take a listen to this.
That doesn't happen, and to protect, say, an app developer from transferring Facebook data to a third party?
Senator, a lot of that we do, and some of that happens outside of our systems and will require new measures. So for example, what we saw here was people chose to share information with an app developer. That worked according to how the system was designed. That information was then transferred out of our system to servers that this developer, Alexander Kogan, had, and then that person chose to then go sell the data to Cambridge Analytica. That is going to require much more active intervention and auditing from us to prevent going forward, because once it's out of our system, it is a lot harder for us to have a full understanding of what's happening.
From what you've said today and from previous statements made by you and other officials at your company, data is at the center of your business model. It's how you make money. Your ability to run your business effectively, given that you don't charge your users, is based on monetizing data. And so the real issue, it seems to me, really comes down to what you tell the public, what you tell users of Facebook about what you're going to do with the data, about how you're going to use it. Can you give me a couple of examples, maybe 2 examples of ways in which data is collected by Facebook?
So there you go. I mean, he said they're responsible for the content, the way a publisher is. Now, what this doesn't show is shortly after that, he took a bit of a, somebody leaned in, kind of whispered in his ear when he took a break, and then came back and said, well, we're not really a publisher. And of course, his lawyers told him to clean that up, because if they are responsible for the content on their platform the way that a publisher is, then that opens them up to all sorts of regulations, all sorts of new expenses. It doesn't allow them to operate in the bubble that they have, and provides them some of the benefits that somebody like, the Wall Street Journal wouldn't have. And it's not just Facebook. It's the same thing for Twitter. Definitely the same thing for YouTube. So as we move forward, the reason that this is important is, on the front end, these companies are on a pathway to making themselves end up being regulated or broken up in some form or fashion by somebody, either a Democrat or Republican or in concert. Okay, when that happens, it's going to affect their business in such a way that you're going to take a hit. Everybody's going to take a hit that's invested in the company. But also, as they roll out these new rules and regulations that so far have not been doled out equally between warring political factions in the country, is it can hurt your business. So, for example, one of the things that Facebook does very well is provide data that allows content creators, either on YouTube or independent publishers, or even large traditional publishers, to pinpoint who their readers and viewers are going to be. You can do it in such a way on Facebook that you can't do anywhere else. I mean, Nielsen has never had the data that Facebook does. But if you use that data to put forth through a movie or book or content that is deemed not the right type of content by one of these left-wing groups, then you're not going to be able to advertise. And if that's your primary or one of the primary revenue drivers, what then? It's interesting. If Random House, for example, has a book that Facebook deems objectionable, if Random House decided that they were going to kick out the money as an advance to the author of that particular property, they have the money and the clout, if you will, to go out and spend money in other areas besides Facebook to get that new publication going, to get that new book going. If you're independent or a smaller publisher, you don't have you don't have the war chest to do that. So you're stuck. The gentleman that wanted to do this wrote the book criticizing the government's response to COVID-19. If he wasn't who he was, an ex-New York Times writer, a writer who was not conservative, he wouldn't have been able to make them back off. He just would have been out of luck. He's lucky he's lucky he is who he is. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. I expect that if Facebook capitulates to Starbucks and all these other companies that are pushing them to have new hate speech rules, somebody coming out and posting, making videos, or writing books about Black Lives Matter, for example, are going to have a problem. That's going to be deemed as hateful. As I said earlier, we're already beginning to see this. Okay, so if you're a company that likes to advertise on Facebook, or if you're an influencer that uses Facebook or YouTube or any of these other platforms, you have to be worried about this, because you never know what you're going to do that's going to tick somebody off. And certainly, while right now left-wingers and Democrat properties and companies seem to be somewhat safe from a lot of this, they won't be for long. These types of rules, there's an old saying, the mob comes for everybody eventually, okay? And so they'll get the conservatives first, and then it'll switch around and come after the Democrats as well, because internal factions within the liberal movement will be fighting each other. Or worse for Facebook or Twitter is that if it comes down to, let me put it this way. I just mentioned how Facebook, because of their analytics, are able to pinpoint readership for publishers and authors in a way that was never been able to be done before in the history of media and advertising as we know it. It's that same analytics, that same power of the information that Facebook collects on every single post, user, photo, video on their platform that makes them the perfect place for politicians to advertise. And as they have more stringent rules and begin to freeze out Republican, conservative-leaning candidates, platforms, and ideas, that's going to activate the ones that are in Congress to ignore what they're inclined to do, which is allow private companies to be private and come after them. I mean, put it this way. If the idea of not interfering with Facebook or these media companies on principle, even though that principle has some give and take, but if it came down to that principle versus Facebook preventing them or affecting elections in such a way because these Republican conservative type stories and ads can't get through, but all the ads and stories for Democrats and liberals get through, they're not going to stand for that. There's just no way. If it comes down to principle and their Senate seat or their congressional seat, they're going to take their Senate or congressional seat. Believe you me, that's the way it's going to happen. And when it does happen, there's going to be obviously an economic impact on Facebook and all the companies that use its platform for for revenue generation and creating their own fans. I mean, look, Facebook is ubiquitous right now. If, for instance, if you have a business, particularly when it's online, especially one that's based in media, whether it's a blog, or, YouTube video, you're a speaker, whatever the case, as an individual or even in large companies, okay, at Facebook, everybody has to have a Facebook page. I mean, it's like having a business card. It's like having a business license almost. And people who do it well, it works really, really well for them. Like extremely well. If you're an independent author, for example, who writes 3 books, but is able to do Facebook ads very well, you literally could be living full-time, 6 figures from just those 3 books advertising on Facebook. And that's just some small little nobody that no one's ever heard of. You start getting into the pocketbooks of CNN and ABC and CBS News and all of the companies that make movies that want to advertise. This is the situation and the money that Facebook wants to continue to have, which means they may go down a direction. But if they get curtailed by regulations, it's going to affect in other areas. Now, the question becomes, how likely is this to happen? I would say, based on what I've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, it's 100% going to happen. When? Well, who knows? I mean, that's like saying, where's the market going to be tomorrow? We don't really know. We can make a lot of guesses, but we don't know definitively. And how it will happen will be interesting. Certainly, Donald Trump could put forth an executive order completely erasing all social media platforms' protection against being sued. They could get rid of that. I mean, he could get rid of that tomorrow if he wanted to. Whether or not he'll do so is a whole nother issue. But he could. He could do that before the election. If he was to lose the election and he thinks it's because of some of the things that Facebook and other social media platforms like Twitter did, he could do it before he leaves office. And given the fact that the Supreme Court just put in place a precedent that they like to follow in terms of keeping executive orders in place, that would make it very difficult for Joe Biden and his vice president to come in and change it. If Donald Trump was to win and doesn't have to worry about, and obviously won't have to worry about re-election, then, I mean, we already think he's unfettered now. You would really unloose the hounds then. And then, apart from Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, again, Tom Cotton, they're all looking at ways in which Facebook is going to end up being regulated in some form or fashion. So again, it is inevitable. The question becomes timing. And for you, if you're a investor in a company, if you own stock in a mutual fund that own carry stock in other social media platforms, what is it that you do? And the question is, well, you don't panic. I mean, this is kind of like the meteor that's going to hit the Earth one day. It's going to happen. Again, we don't know when. The best thing you can do is you take a look at let's take a look at this chart again for Facebook. You take a look at where you got in the market. If you own individual stock and maybe you put in stop loss orders. If you're not familiar with a stop loss order, it's nothing more than a predetermined price that you have an open order for, that if the stock price falls to that level, you get out. So let's take a look at this chart again real quick. So at this level, you're right at $125 dollars per stock price, right? Per stock. So that's a natural, what they call natural support area in technical terms. You could have a stop loss order in that if it gets to 125, it automatically sells all your shares. You go to cash on that particular position and you wait and see what happens. Okay, that's one thing you could do. If you are in a mutual fund that owns stock in Facebook or other media platforms, you really wouldn't, sell out of the mutual fund because of something that happens with an individual company like Facebook, because of course, in a mutual fund, it's not just one company. It's a lot of companies that the mutual fund is investing in. But you would want to keep an eye on what's the weighted value. I mean, the weighted value in the mutual fund, meaning how many shares and that what percentage of the invested amount is that any particular company, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Google, does the mutual fund hold? If it gets too high, then maybe you might, move on to a different type of mutual fund. Or you just might decide, wait and see. If you are using Facebook as an advertising platform or as a platform to build your brand, then going forward in the short term, a lot of your stuff, if it's already on the edges of what might be acceptable for their content, you're going to have to make a lot more vanilla content. It's not going to be as impactful for what it is that you're doing. I mean, if you're a comedian that likes to push the boundaries of what's funny, pretty soon you're not going to be able to get away with that on Facebook and YouTube. You're just not. You're going to have to be a little bit more vanilla plain, or try to send people to your private platform on a website and use mainly YouTube or Facebook as kind of like a feeder site to your own platform. Those are the things that you're going to have to do. If you work for a large corporation and you're involved in marketing or media buying, this is going to make your job a lot harder, because you're going to have to navigate or try to navigate what's acceptable. And, what was acceptable 3 months ago isn't acceptable today. I mean, 3 months ago, Aunt Jemima was fine. Uncle Ben's rice was perfect. All of a sudden, it's not. 6 months ago, Gone with the Wind was still considered one of the best movies of all time. And then now HBO wants to put up special content to talk about the way that African Americans were talked about and depicted in the movie, even though the movie was accurately, to a certain degree, depicting what was going on in that time period. Things are crazy. So if you're in the media, again, if you're a marketer for a large corporation, you're going to have to pay a lot more attention to this, because your job is going to get harder. But there is a silver lining in all of this, and that's what I'm going to end this particular video with, and that is this. When AT&T was broken up and we had the baby bells, a new era of innovation and profitability and new companies sprung from that. Okay, it's kind of interesting. Republicans don't like government intervention typically. Okay, and there are a lot of good reasons for that, even with regard to some of the things that happened with the Ma Bell breakup. But in other areas, it's like when there's a forest fire. It's horrible, but then new growth comes out afterward. Okay, so the baby bells did well. A lot of innovation came out. As I said earlier, I'm not so sure we would have the wireless market and tools that we have today if Ma Bell hadn't been broken up. So if Facebook, Twitter, especially Google, because right now, think about it. Google is a search engine. They're an advertiser with huge reach and about as analyticals as pinpointed as Facebook, and probably a lot more information, because while Facebook has a lot of information about your interests and subjects surrounding what you post, what you search for on Google, since most people use Google, is going to be a lot more information surrounding that. Okay, so they've got even more powerful information than Facebook does. But they're also a media giant because they own YouTube. So they've got 3 different sections that gives them an undue influence on the American public and what we are seeing. that could end up being broken up. You could see YouTube going from Google to being its own thing. You could see Google say, it's conceivable that they could say Google must be a free search engine, but the advertising can't be part of it. I mean, who knows what could happen? But the point is, when that does happen, it's going to open up it's going to make room for new companies, new ideas, and new innovation that will allow other sorts of growth. Okay, so in the short term, they take a hit. In the long term, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, unless it's something so severe, they would turn into something else, and there would be other opportunities. So think about what I just said a few moments ago. If you're a media person or marketer that's working for a large corporation, all of these changes that Facebook is doing right now and what will be forced on Facebook and all these social media platforms later on by politicians is going to make your job harder. But it's also, as a result of that, going to give you possible opportunity. It might be that you get so good at navigating these waters that you leave your job and create your own marketing firm. You create your own video production company. You create your own written content creation company to help companies navigate these waters. Because trust, a company like ABC, for instance, or a company like Denny's, a company like Starbucks, they'll pay you money to help them do their advertising versus paying lawyers to help them get through some other, problem. So again, where there could be destruction in the beginning, there's always going to be the opportunity for something new amongst the chaos. That's going to do it for this particular video. If you like the content, or if you, I hope you subscribe. Go ahead and hit the notification bell so that you know when the next video is coming out. If you have any questions or comments, please put them down below, as I would like to hear from you. And we'll see you in the next segment.